Welcome to the Happy Soul Podcast. My name is Melissa, and this is Sammy. We are diving deep into conversations that connect and inspire. Stories of resilience, triumph, and transformation. Stories that take us to the heart of human connection. Please note that opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect those of this podcast. Please listen with your kindness and an open mind. Each story shared is authentic and vulnerable. Let's embrace our differences with empathy, knowing every voice enriches us. Together, let's cultivate a community of respect and curiosity. Thank you for listening. Now sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired.
Welcome to the Happy Soul Podcast, everybody. Today we are here with Kristin Johnson. Kristin is here to talk with us about her family and her son, Rhett. This story is about Rhett's diagnosis, which happened when he was 4 years old. He's now 5. He was diagnosed with Rhabdomyosarcoma. And we want to talk with Kristin about the journey, the diagnosis, their story, some of the obstacles that this family has gone through and overcome in terms of Rhett's diagnosis and moving forward from there. And just to help raise awareness to childhood cancer as we are doing this month. So welcome to the podcast, Kristin.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So obviously, not obviously, let's just start off kind of at the beginning. I feel like makes the most sense. You told us before we started recording that Rhett was diagnosed at the age of 4. Can you kind of bring us back to that story? What were the first symptoms that you guys saw? What kind of happened at the beginning there, and what kind of led up to that diagnosis?
Sure. So when I look back on the time, the first time I saw any signs of symptoms, we were down in Palm Springs for spring break. And I just noticed him needing to go to the washroom quite often. So just an urgency. Thought nothing of it at all. Until we got home. And then I remember being like, oh gosh, if he had a bladder infection, I have had one of those and I know how uncomfortable they are. So if it comes back, I need to be sure to address it because I probably should have in the first place, but life got busy. So that was in March. And then you fast forward to mid-May of 2023, and it came back. Same thing, just urgency and just going all the time. Took him in to see the doctor, and they did a urine sample, and they said it didn't come back conclusive for a bladder infection. But they would put him on medication just in case. And they saw that there was potentially blood in the urine, but it wasn't visible. So they put him on medication. It did nothing. It actually probably progressed quite a bit more. And then so we went back a couple days later, or it probably was about 6 days later that we went back, saw a different doctor, and same thing, urine sample, same conclusion. It wasn't your typical markers for bladder infection. So they gave him like a topical cream because they're like, maybe he's just having pain. And the doctor was like, maybe his pelvic floor is just really inflamed, which is, as moms, we hear that, but we don't hear that for a 4-year-old. So gave him a topical cream, also did nothing. And then there was one day where he was just acting himself, doing the same thing, like running to the bathroom all the time. And then all of a sudden just started screaming and was in an immense amount of pain. And he would go to the bathroom and he would be fine. And I was like, oh, okay, something has shifted. Something is not right. So I took him over to the hospital, and we lived pretty close to the hospital, and I needed to stop twice on the way to let him just pee on the side of the road. And he seemed to be fine. We got there. And same thing. I think the nurses could see that he was in quite a bit of pain. So they fast tracked us, but not really. We still sat in the waiting room. And the poor kid, we were just in and out of the bathroom. We finally got back. Again, I think they did 3 urine samples. Same thing. Nothing really showed up. The doctor came in and said, he's too young for kidney stones. I think this might just be kind of a boy situation that's going on. Send him home, give him a warm bath and tell him to pee in the bath was his recommendation. So I left there thinking, I was exhausted. My husband was actually away in BC during this time, opening up our spot that we spend our summers. So I had dealt with this urgency back and forth and needing to follow. So I was exhausted. So I think I heard that and was just like, inside I knew that sounded crazy, but was like, okay. So that was a Friday. And actually on my way to the hospital, I called my husband and said, you have to come home. I'm so tired. Called back later being like, okay, I'm sorry. I was just really stressed. You don't actually have to come home. So then he did end up coming home. Fast forward to Sunday, we had some people over dealing with the same situation, urgency, running back and forth. And we would try to follow him just to make sure. And my husband followed him this time. And he came back down and he said, Kristin, there's blood everywhere. And I was like, what? Where's that coming from? And again, it didn't take long for him to have to go again. So I followed him and he was just peeing straight blood. And I think as crazy, like I'm a worrier. I am a hypochondriac and I kind of go worst case, but my mind didn't even go there this time. So it must have been some sort of protection mode my body went into. So I knew it wasn't great. And I ended up actually calling, my daughter's friend's dad, who works in the medical field. And he was able to kind of give me some tips. We went the next morning back to the doctor. This is the first time I felt like they were kind of aware and like, okay, this isn't proper for a 4-year-old. So said, okay, tomorrow morning you're going to go for blood work. And then after you get the blood work, we'll give you the meds, the next set of meds or a different kind of meds. And I was like, okay. And then, so that was Monday. Tuesday, my husband took him because I knew there's no way he's going to be able to get blood work with me. So my husband took him and he was back to peeing straight blood. And it was after that I couldn't get the medication because it needed to be compounded. And by the time I needed it, it would have been the next day. So I called another friend of mine who also works in the medical field. And she said to me, Kristin, you're very calm. The moment I would have seen blood, I would have been at the hospital. So I knew that I think I was in like protection mode and not worrying as I naturally would. But with that, I went home and I said to Drew, okay, we got to take him. We got to take him to the children's. So my sister and I went up with my niece. We sat there and it was wild. He would run to the bathroom, pee, straight blood. Then we'd come back to the waiting area and he'd be like standing on his head. And I remember saying to people in the waiting room, I'm like, something is going on. I promise we need to be here. Because I felt so bad. Because I'm like, I promise we do need to see a doctor. But he's like standing on his head. But then peeing straight blood. It was bizarre. Once we finally got in, they did a bunch of blood work, which was just, that kind of started the really traumatic experience for him. Because when he needed his IV, I think they did it. It popped back out. So then it was like full restraining to get it into him. And then we had to do it again. So there were just so many things where I just, as a mom, you don't want to see your child in pain, but then to be the one to have to restrain them when they're in pain is horrible. And we left there that night, the nurse is telling us that it was an exceptionally busy night with a lot of really big things. I didn't really assume that included me. So we were sent home at 2 a.m. and we were told to come back the following day to get an ultrasound. So at this point we're leaving and we're still not really thinking anything. My husband and I bring him up for his ultrasound the next day. They said, okay, you'll get the ultrasound and then you'll go straight up to urology. So we did that. He's still peeing blood. He's still peeing constantly. And we're sitting in the urology room. And I'll never forget. I think they actually forgot about us because we sat there for quite a long time. But there were these pamphlets and my husband and I were looking and we'd be like, oh, okay, maybe this is what it is. Or maybe like looking at all the symptoms. Maybe this is what it is. Neither of us even, like the words never came out of our mouth. And then finally they came in. And she opened up her computer and she said, okay, so tell me what's going on. I'm like, well, it's a bit of a long story. And I remember her saying, that's okay. Our computer's not really opening up fast. So you have time. So I started, I don't even think I got through half of it. And she looked at me and she said, okay, I'm really glad you were persistent. I'm really glad you're here because we have found a large mass. And I think at that time I heard the word mass. Again, not putting that to cancer quite yet, but I heard the word mass and my heart sunk. And then we had the most amazing urologist, Dr. Weber, come in, and you could tell he was worried. He never said the word cancer. At one point he almost said it, but then he didn't say it, but we knew what we were dealing with. And he moved fast. He said, okay, we're going to send Rhett downstairs. We're going to do CT. And then we'll go from there. So off we went. First he had to drink the whatever the dye drink is. And I'll never forget sitting in the children's, which I have been so lucky. My kids had never really needed to go there. I never went there growing up. And I remember sitting there and there was someone playing the piano, which was beautiful. But like when your heart is breaking, sad music is awful. Like I think I just broke. And I just remember looking at Rhett being like, he has no idea what he's up against. And then knowing he had to have the CT scan. So once we waited the hour, my sister had come at this point and took him back to the CT. I sat it in the waiting area and I just sat there in tears. I just needed to, well, I don't actually know what I needed at that moment, but I heard Rhett screaming. And again, he needed an IV and they couldn't. And my sister came out and I guess there was like 5 nurses and one of the nurses needed to leave because it was just so heartbreaking for her to see Rhett. That whole process didn't end up working. They said, okay, they brought down a special machine to try to find the nerve, but by that point there was just no use. There was no calming him down. Which for me at that point, now I am in panic mode and I want to know what's going on. So to not be able to have that scan at that time was awful. But we just knew we couldn't put Rhett through anymore. So they decided to do it the following day where he would get the biopsy, which meant they would put him under anesthetic. So they would put the IV in at that time. So we left, we drove home and we're a good 30 minutes. And again, he still, like, nothing had changed. So he still had that urgency. He still needed to pee all the time. So we just got not too far and he said he had to pee. And I felt like I was going to be physically sick. So we pull over because I feel like I'm going to be sick and he's needing to pee. And that night is an experience that I don't think I can fully explain. It was out of body. I just remember laying on Rhett's bed and just being in tears. And it was horrible. But then the saddest part was Rhett was the one making sure I was okay. And Rhett was the one being like, Mom, do you need water? And all these things. And I was like, you have no idea what you're up against. You have no idea what's about to come. Wow. So then we came back the next day. They called us and they said, we have a room available. And I think I don't think I realized, well, they don't really prep you. The ball just rolls. So by them having a room, I didn't know we were there to like stay put for X amount of days. So we weren't really prepared. But we head back up. They have a room. He did the biopsy. He went under. They put a catheter in. And then I think we were in the hospital for about 2 weeks, which was so hard because he had the catheter. When they went in with the mass, it was directly, like it took up the majority of his bladder. So Dr. Weber tried to make like a channel so he would still be able to pee properly and get everything out. But he wasn't sure if it would work because he said when he did that, it was just like stones and it just kind of fell in. So they did the catheter and it must have worked because the catheter did its job and he was able to get rid of everything. So that was a kind of a first good sign. But those 2 weeks were awful. I would imagine he was feeling quite sick. He was like a good dose of traumatized at this point. He had a catheter in and it was just awful. So yeah, that's where we sat and I'll never forget being taken into the side rooms where they would tell us the diagnosis. They would pull up his little body on the screen, which I would go to look at and then I would have to move away because it was like you just see your child's little body on the screen and it was horrible. So then that's when they had they had seen at that point, they'd done the bone scan by this point they hadn't done the bone scan. So we know the mass is in the bladder. Then they told us they saw spots on each side of his ribs, his liver, and his lungs. So then for us, we're like, okay, that's bad. Like, that's metastasized to multiple areas. So they did the bone scan, and that came back quite quickly and quite quickly said it was not in the ribs. It was almost too symmetrical. And I remember when Dr. Weber had told us it was on the ribs, he's like, I think it's just like boys being boys in roughhousing. So I don't think I was super worried because he made it sound like it was just bruising, which it did end up being. So that's great. But he was still considered high risk. He was still considered stage 4. And then we get told he has to go to Florida for 9 weeks. And just before Florida, they did some extra testing on his liver because the spot on his liver that showed on the CT didn't show on the PET. So that confused them. So they did a bit more deep diving into that. And I think it came back after again, it didn't show up. So they did an ultrasound and they did another MRI. I don't even know. I don't remember all the tests. But just before he went to Florida, it came back that the liver spot was actually not diseased, which was huge. So now we've gone from high risk and now we've been downgraded to intermediate, which when you put numbers to cancer, that changes things significantly. So that was really exciting. We also have learned that numbers don't really mean anything. But at that point I was pretty fixated on the numbers. So for my heart, that was really good. So he went down to Florida. He had 28 sessions of radiation. He would go 5 days in a row. Each day he went there, he would be put under anesthetic. He would have his radiation. And then we'd wait for him to wake up. And it was the most wild experience because he'd wake up and be kind of groggy and then he'd be ready to go play. So we were down there for 9 weeks, which was such a hard time as a family. My husband was first to go down with him because it was the beginning of school for our other 3. So he took Rhett down and got him all situated down there. The 3 kids and I went at the end of September, I guess. We had a week all together. Drew brought those 3 back, and then Rhett and I stayed for an additional 5. So it was a pretty tough summer from a family who spends a lot of time together. It was about 4 months where I think my husband and I saw each other for 10 days. And so it was a rough start on our family. Brett's the youngest and we have 3 older ones. And so for them, it was balancing, finding out your brother's sick, your brother's leaving. How do you manage life so it stays kind of normal for everybody amongst a really tough diagnosis?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's kind of the beginning of it. I feel like there's so many little steps and things in between. But that's kind of the gist of the story to start.
Wow, Kristin. Thanks for sharing that. Obviously all being moms on here, like you can just, obviously we don't feel what you feel, but as much as we can feel like those heart drop moments that you're talking about, man, thanks for sharing that. Can I ask you, how is it for you to reshare that story? Is it hard? Is it therapeutic? Is it both? Is it uncomfortable? How is it for you to share that story?
For me, I think it would be way more therapeutic. Sometimes it's hard, but way more than not sharing it, I think it helps my processing. It helps working through the hard part of it. For me, it's never been a negative experience. I've always been very willing to share it, which isn't the case for everybody. And I think a lot of people think they don't ask any questions because they're afraid. Mm-hmm. They don't want to make me feel sad, or they don't want to say something that triggers me per se. But for me personally, I will always welcome the questions because every question I get to answer makes somebody else more aware of pediatric cancer. Because I think as human beings, we know cancer is prevalent, but there's so many aspects of it that we have learned people really aren't aware of, especially in pediatric. So yeah, I think I have no problem sharing it at all. I often think it's harder for the people I share it to because they don't really understand. Well, they do understand. They're often parents themselves. So they kind of put themselves in my position, which it's heartbreaking and it's horrible. But I've gone through that process where I have my moments where I still fall apart. And oftentimes when I tell the story, I will fall apart. But that's not because I don't want to talk about it. It's just a heartbreaking story.
Yeah, I mean, you're reliving pieces of it as you tell it, right? So of course it's going to make you break down in some way, shape, or form when you're telling it. Absolutely. And I think you have an incredible heart for thinking, I think it's harder for the other people, because personally, I don't care about the other people. They're not going through it. Like that.
We spoke at a golf tournament in August, so we were pretty fresh into it. And this golf tournament was hosted by a medical family, and they said to my husband and I, be prepared to lose friends, but be prepared to gain some, or be open to gaining some. And at that time, you don't want to think that, but it's true. When you go through crisis, there are people who have no idea. They have no idea how to support you. And I said pretty early on at the end of this, or at some point, I say I would like to write a book, but I don't think I actually want to write a book. But just like steps on how to support families going through crisis, because so many people have no idea, and they think it needs to be this big extravagant amount of money or this big extravagant helping hand. But it honestly could be as simple as dropping a coffee off, texting and being like, hey, I put a coffee on your step. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
And that would mean the world. But people, they get so nervous. So they don't do anything. And I've had this situation a couple of times where they don't know what to do, so they do nothing. And that's far more hurtful.
Yeah. It's better to say or do the smallest thing that could be the wrong thing than do nothing. Because even if you do the wrong thing, but you've tried to do something, that person knows that you're trying to support them, versus doing nothing seems like you don't care and you're not aware of whatever struggle they're going through. Is that, yeah?
100%. And we've had people say to us, I'm trying to think how it was worded, because it was said recently again to my husband. I might have to come back to that because I don't remember what it is. I'm like, I wish people would just not assume we have a lot of support. We do. Like, my family has been incredible. My family they almost know what we need before we need it. So they're here and they're involved. And I think it's often, and this is another situation where I would say, take social media, and that's like the production, but you need to kind of pull back the curtain and see what's happening. So yes, we have this outstanding support, which we wouldn't have made it without it. But if you pull back the curtain, we still need our friends. We still need family. But on social media, it looks like we've got it together, or it looks like we have everything we need. And by no means do I expect anything from anybody, but it's just that kind of picture perfect social media, right? I only post the good moments. I don't post when Rhett is throwing up and I'm trying to hold his tubie, because I don't want his tubie to come out, because if his tubie comes out, then he has to get it re-put in. Or where he, where he's on the ground and we're trying to get his medicine into him. I'm not going to post those moments. So a coffee on the doorstep would be incredible. But we've had a few people say to us, just let us know what you need. And it would be those people who I would like to say, I'm not going to, because that's one more thing for me to think about. That's one more choice for me to make. And I don't want to make any choices. So without saying it, I would want to be like, for anyone that says that, you probably won't hear from me, because I'm not going to ask anybody for anything.
Yeah. Wow. And I think I heard it say sorry, Melissa, I'm just like shoving you in a corner while I talk at Kristin here. I've heard it said before that it's like, ask for what you need. It's like, yeah, absolutely. Ask for what you need. If you can think of what you need, ask for it. But being the person that wants to give, don't wait to be asked, because I think that often the person going through crisis doesn't know what they need. Like, they have no idea what they need. And so they're not going to think, oh, I need a coffee. Can someone drop me off a coffee? Or I want a fresh cooked meal right now because I've been to the hospital for 2 weeks. They don't think of those things. And if they do, they don't think to ask for it. They'll just go get it themselves. So for someone to just like eliminate that step and just do it, that's what, without being asked, that's what shows. Like, think about, break it down to not crisis stuff. Think about in your house. Do you like it better when someone just empties the dishwasher or when you ask them to empty the dishwasher? Like, which one do you appreciate more when it's just done? And so it's the same thing with, I mean, not the same, obviously not the same, but the same mentality. Just doing it is far better than waiting to be asked. Sorry, Kristin, I just repeated what you said, but
no, it's 100%. But I think we're not wired to do that. We're often wired to be like, if you need anything, and I'm guilty of this, when somebody goes through a hard time, let me know if you need anything. But now I know better. I still will probably say that, but I will often follow it with, okay, do you want me to send you a meal, bring you a meal, or would you prefer a skip the dishes gift card? So I'll kind of give them an option. They'll pick one of them, and then I go with that. But I think it's just a simple thing. It's kind of like when people see me and they'd be like, how are you doing? Do you actually know? Because that's a loaded question. But it's just natural. They don't mean anything wrong. It's just a conversation starter, much like when you reach out to somebody, oh my goodness, I am so sorry you're going through this. Please let me know. I'm not going to let you know. Not because they're unkind, not because they don't care, because it's exactly what you said. They don't know what you need. At the beginning of this, all I needed was for someone to tell me my son was going to be okay. That's all. Nothing else mattered. Just tell me my son's going to be okay, which nobody could. So it was, it's really the simplest little things have a massive impact.
Yeah, totally.
Do you have some of those things? Like, how have you felt the most supported? Does anything stand out to you?
I think the biggest things are my family showing up, being there. There were times where I needed to, Beckham had a concert and Rhett spiked a fever. And automatically I often think, okay, I need to go with Rhett because Rhett is like more connected and more attached to me than before. But my mom and my sister were like, no, we will take Rhett. You need to go be with Beckham because Beckham needs you. And it's moments like that where I'm like, you're right. Thank you. Beckham does need me. He's only 7. He has no idea what's happening. And he still very much needs his mom and dad to go watch him. So moments like that where I think they, because they care so much, they were able to be like, no, let us take this. You go do that. And then my best friend just being there, getting down on her hands and knees, being at the hospital, loving on whether it's Beckham, hanging out with Emery and Paxton, or just loving on Rhett. So for me, I think my husband would probably have a different answer, but for me, it's just people being present and really just coming alongside us. And it's just and it's not like this for everybody, but for my family and for my friend Jess, it's no work. Like they come here and I can sit on the couch and I feel like I can breathe and they will just play. They will just do whatever. My mom will do the dishes. So it's not extra work. So I think those are when I feel like it gives me room to breathe, which fills my bucket and then kind of helps me move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
How old are your other 3 kids?
So our oldest, our daughter, Emery, she's 14. And then our son, Paxton, he just turned 13. Beckham turned 8 in February, and then Rhett. So girl and 3.
Okay.
Wow. I want to ask, obviously we are going to ask about Rhett, but I want to ask, how have the other siblings been with the diagnosis and the treatment? How are they doing with all of this?
I think having the older, I'll put them in 2 groups, our big kids and then our little kids. So our big kids, they're able to understand it. I think at the beginning, there was a good amount of obvious shock and worry. Our daughter, Emery, she's in the Young Canadians. And when we received the diagnosis, she was at rehearsal. And starting May, they amp up and they have crazy rehearsals because they're preparing the grandstand show. So she's downtown quite a bit training. So we had told the other boys she wasn't around and she came home, and I'll never forget telling her and her just breaking. But also us not really knowing what they need. At that time, she was 13, I guess, and Paxton was 12. Um, we didn't really know how they would respond. And I think initially they did what we did. They broke, and then they both kind of rallied. Emery, we ended up pulling them timing wise. We have found quickly that we need to find everyday miracles, and that just kind of gives us something to focus on. We actually have bracelets, and it reminds us everyday miracles, and then it has the rally for Rhett. But I think it really helps shift your focus. So one of the everyday miracles at that time was he was diagnosed June 8th, and by the time we got out of the hospital, it was mid-June. School was almost over, so we just pulled the kids and just were together as a family. And I think that hugely impacted their ability to process those first few weeks because they could just be with us. So for Emery, she has struggled with anxiety, and we had kind of managed it and we were in a good place. And then I saw it going, and I was like, we need to nip this in the butt for her sake, my sake. So I said, okay, we're going to pull you from school. You're pretty much done anyways. You're going to be with your brother or you're at Young Canadians. And that's where you're going to split your time. And it immediately shifted, and she was able to cope. So we just really focused on being together. Paxton, I think he's gone through some pretty hard things for a young kiddo. He witnessed our neighbor in an accident that ended up taking his life. So he's had to process some really, really hard things. And he's the most resilient, brave kiddo. But it also worried us. So we made sure that he kind of kept seeing his counselor that he'd processed that trauma with, which was huge for him. So you really kind of figure out what works, what they need. So Paxton, he just needed to know he needed to be with us, and he needed to go see Miranda, and that helped balance him. Emery just needed to be with us or with her brother or Young Canadians. And then for Beckham, who was 7, his best friend is Rhett. They were always together. And he was kind of at that part just along for the ride. He played with Rhett when Rhett was home. But when the time came for Florida, that's where I started to get concerned because they're together. The big kids have their friends, they have their activities. So oftentimes it's just us with the little boys at home. And that was removed. So for Beckham, we put him in hockey, and this was his first year hockey. And we just said, we need him to have something to focus on. We need him to have something to work at. And it was huge. It was, I think the reason he was able to manage is that it gave him that one-on-one time with one of us. It gave him something to look forward to. And so, yeah, they all, overall, I will say, we have weathered this quite well. We've said from the beginning we wanted to keep life as normal as possible. And I really think, aside from what we are actually dealing with, we've done it well. We've just kind of made our circle smaller. We've been together. When they cry, we let them cry. When they have questions, but we just love on Rhett. We focus on family, and really just, I think the big thing is just focusing what's most important.
Wow. That's beautiful. It sounds like you're just doing a remarkable job at, I mean, I can't imagine how difficult it must be to focus on each child in a moment like that and focus on what they're going to need and what they are needing. I mean, it sounds like you're just doing remarkable at it. That's incredible. And sorry, Sammy, now I'm doing it. I want to ask about Rhett. How is he? How has this been for him?
Yeah, for a 4-year-old, he has done so well. And on one hand, I think his age really worked in his favor in a lot of ways, not in all ways. The ways it worked in his favor is he didn't know what he was up against. He didn't know how the medicine should make him feel. He didn't know any of that. So I feel like that worked in his favor. I also quite quickly came across online a functional, I always forget the name. A functional nutritionist is essentially what she is. Functional nutritionist. And it was just wild. I came across her and I, of course, like, she has these cancer packs that she sends to families. So of course, like right away, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally want one of those. They only ship to the States. But then she was just starting up a group and to work with families who have recently had kids diagnosed with cancer. She initially started her program as a functional nutritionist, but then her son actually had leukemia when he was 3. So she shifted her focus to pediatric cancer. And so I signed up, joined this group with these other moms, and it was a pretty small group when we started in September, but it's been a game changer. And the sole focus for me at the beginning for Rhett was shifting his nutrition because he didn't have an appetite. So the focus really was getting some good stuff in his body. And this is where you can take this out if I'm not allowed to say it. This is where I feel like the medical world does families a disservice because they will tell families to feed their kid whatever. They'll still say, if he wants ice cream, just feed him ice cream. If he wants McNuggets, feed him McNuggets. And while I'm okay if he has that, that cannot be his only source of nutrition. So working alongside Season has allowed me to really, I feel, considerably impact his gut health, which has completely shifted how he has responded. And I think I always say, if you can use the word thrive and cancer together, which I would never have thought, he really has. He has had way more good days than bad days. When I really started working with her, he hasn't had an unplanned hospital admit. His numbers have been good. He hasn't had to have a blood transfusion. Now, I will say, as a 4 or 5-year-old, which you guys know, getting them to eat anything healthy is incredibly difficult. So this is where for him, the NG was such a blessing because I can put whatever I want through it and it's amazing. So I make all my concoctions and I put bone broth through there and all his supplements, and I'll juice vegetables and I'll put it through there and he just has it. But he has learned to really love his Tubi, we call it. And I think he likes it because he knows he feels better when he has it because he gets this nutrition. So all that to say, he has done really well. And in January, he had his second set of scans and he was considered cancer-free, which was huge and it was amazing. But also such a weird feeling because as parents, it's like, okay, but we still have 9 months of treatment. So everybody else we would tell was like in tears and super excited, but we know that we're not done. And we also, I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully breathe because we've had so many things. My husband said, he's like, it's almost like we're just waiting for the next shoe to fall. So I felt bad not getting excited, as excited and as grateful as I was, because there's another way it could have gone, right? He could have had more cancer. He could have not had any response. So while I am very grateful, I think I was like cautiously optimistic. So that was January. We stayed with like continued treatment. And then the plan was to rescan April. If we're still clear, that's when we shift to maintenance. So he had the scans in April, still clear. So we shifted to maintenance, which is, it's maintenance, but on paper, it feels like a lot. So we're in this for 6 months now. So it's every day oral chemo. And then 3 times a month, chemo through his IVAD. And we'll do that. So he kind of has 1 week every month where he has nothing. And then, yeah, so the 1st, the 8th, and the 15th, he'll get the chemo through his IVAD, and every day he will get it orally or through his NG, which is another reason it's great because oral chemo tastes terrible. So we can just push it through the NG and not worry that he's not getting it all or anything. So as of right now, no evidence of disease, and we're in the first month of maintenance.
Wow.
That's incredible. I gotta ask, like, so sometimes I feel like we say that's incredible a lot. I'm like, need a new sentence. it is like what's incredible. Let me be more specific here. What's incredible is hearing you speak about not only that he's at this point cancer free, but the difference that you're saying you noticed in changing his food. Can you tell me like what differences you saw? Like if there was a time where you weren't following this person, that you noticed how he was responding versus after you started following this person? Is that a thing that exists?
Yeah, totally. So prior to following, he was so thin, so frail, not a lot of energy. So he was able to come out to our lake last year. I think he was there for about 4 days, and he managed to play duck, duck, goose, I think twice with the kids, and the big kids all rallied and they all played. And that was his highlight, but that was about it. So his energy was severely lower, but frail. I remember hearing somebody who had seen him and was like, I think at that point he looked sick. And then, but we didn't have the NG at that time. And I think if we got a popsicle into him, we were doing pretty good. So he was like slowly withering away. And then once we started working with her, and I was able to we put the NG in, like energy, for the most part, he was a normal 4-year-old. He would obviously have some bad days, especially on the high chemo days. But even from his high chemo days, it would kind of drop him for a few hours, and then he'd be back to himself. So I think even the turnaround after chemo that would knock an adult probably out for a while, he was out for probably less than 24 hours, and then he was back running and jumping. And so I think the biggest way was energy for sure. 2 weeks prior to him being diagnosed with cancer, he was diagnosed with apraxia, which is a speech delay. And that felt earth-shattering. I'll never forget that. I cried at that point, and I'm like, we never want something to be wrong with our kids. And we knew he had a speech delay, but I think to put a label to it made it hard. So when we started treatment, his speech has like gotten crazy. He's still behind, but he was like severely behind. But so I think everything in his body is just functioning way better. We also do a lot of detox, and I think we're trying to get rid of any excess chemo or radiation. And so it really is trying to fill his body with good stuff, but trying to get rid of the bad stuff that is being put into him. And while I am incredibly grateful for the medical side of things, and our amazing oncologists, a lot of gross stuff goes into these kids at a level that is pretty high. So the detox is huge. And I think between the two, yeah, we've seen a completely different kiddo.
That must be like so heartwarming to see that turnaround for him. Hey, to see that he can still be, for the most part, a happy 4-year-old while going through such harsh treatments. And I don't think you're out of place by saying it's something that's lacking in the medical system. And we're not here giving medical advice. We're just talking about experiences. But I do think that, and this isn't to say bad things about Western medicine, but we have struggled to get on the preventative side of things, and we always just focus on the reactive. And I think needs to be a thing where I don't know a lot about all of these different things out there, but if we can all get on the same page where all of these people, doctors and naturopaths and chiropractors and acupuncturists and Chinese medicine and all this stuff can all like be like, oh, okay, here's where this prevents this and here's where this prevents this. So we can all actually learn a lot more about that and work together instead of against each other. It would create such a different system in lowering what's happening in the medical system and all the people that are attending, and helping the people who are in there that need extra like gut health and things like that you're saying. Like, and this is not medical advice. Please, nobody come at me for anything I'm saying here, but it's just true. Like it works better. I feel like there's a million questions in an entire episode I could ask you about all of these things that are helping Rhett. I don't know if you can speak on them, but can you list like maybe a couple of things that you think he's taken that have made a big difference for him?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So the biggest one that I make sure I do daily is bone broth. So I use a Calgary company if I can, but I've also had 2 friends who have made bone broth. So even tonight, a lady, she was like, I made bone broth. Can I drop it off? And she'll bring a bag of like ice cube size. Like she will just put in the ice cube trays, freeze it, And then I just grab what I need, warm it up, and then I put it in his little tubey bag. So I have 2 friends who do that. So bone broth is a big one that we give him. Vitamin C, magnesium. Um, Again, a big part of it is the detox aspect of it. So there's a lot of things with that focus that we use. I give him, oh gosh, what's it called? A beef complex. So super important for us, which I never heard this before, to eat like beef organs. But I'm not going to get him to eat like liver. I'm certainly not going to eat liver. But there's this amazing company in Alberta, actually, that does this beef complex and gets all like these essential nutrients from the beef organs. And it's their grass fed and a super healthy way that they do it. And so I give him 6 of those a day. It's actually wild. If you see me, as I stand at my kitchen table every night, I break capsules. I probably break 30 capsules a night and add it to his little thing. Another one I give him it's a Paleo Valley protein powder. Strangely enough, it has colostrum in it, but it's a super clean protein powder with colostrum, and that's a big thing that they have said. Yeah,
Colostrum's magic. That doesn't surprise me. Colostrum is
right?
magical. Yeah.
Yeah, but even a probiotic, like huge. They should all be on a probiotic. I double check with Season, who I really trust. And there is another doctor on the call, so I really do trust, and I make sure with them that this is okay. But this is also stuff that we without cancer should be doing. And that is, I mean, I have found the most amazing guy that I go get all my supplements from. And I said, I need like stocks in your business because it's so expensive, unfortunately. But we have tried to shift how our whole family works. I mean, sugar is another big one. They will say sugar doesn't impact it. I don't know statistically how much, but when they do a PET scan, they put sugar in large amounts in your body to detect cancer. So I'm not entirely sure how it doesn't impact because it makes it light up. So we have really tried to reduce sugar. Again, he's a 4-year-old. We're not removing it completely. We've just tried to lessen the amount.
Yeah.
Her name's Season Johnson, and it's helping families thrive through cancer. And she really puts everything on her Instagram. So anytime I get like notification of a new family who's been diagnosed, I often kind of lead them to her.
I think it's awesome that you've been able to see that difference in Rhett and find someone that's been able to help you so much because, yeah, it's probably been a huge game changer for you. And I also remember when we met at the Jessica Jansen event, you mentioning this. I remember you talking about finding Season, and I couldn't remember all the things you said, but as you're saying it now, I'm like, yes, I remember you saying so much about this, about how much of a difference it's made for you guys and how grateful you were for finding her. So Season, praise to you. That's fantastic. I want to just jump back really quickly to something you were saying just before we kind of got into learning about some of the stuff that's helped Rhett. And it's kind of really jumping back, but I really just want to say it because I think it's really beautiful when Melissa asked you that question about how your other kids have been handling this. The way you could zone in on each kid and what they needed and how to help them is really incredible. I just want to praise you for that because I think it is really beautiful and really incredible the way you were able to identify each kid's needs in that moment and pay attention to them. And this isn't to shame anybody or say anything bad. If it was me, I don't think I'd be able to do that. I think I would just be so zoned in on the kid that was sick and that needed me very badly. And I think that's a natural reaction. And so I think it's really beautiful that you were able to like do that is what I wanted to say. It wasn't really a question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's not been easy or flawless, but we have kind of seen the benefit of it. So
Yeah, that's awesome. In sharing your story with us today, what is your hope for sharing your story with us today?
I think that's a good question. I think my biggest thing would be, it's so often anytime you hear about someone in crisis, they say nothing like this happens to us, right? Until you're in it, you don't really know. And while that's true, I think we just need to, I would just like to see more compassion, more people aware of that things in life happen, and they happen when you least expect it. And I think when you become kind of super comfortable and complacent and just do your daily stuff, that's oftentimes when it will happen. And I think being brave enough to kind of put yourself out there, and whether that is advocate for a certain situation or advocate, I mean, for now, we will forever advocate for pediatric cancer. And you know what? I'm not really sure what I would have done differently before this. So that's where this question is hard, because I don't know, you don't know what you don't know. And while we never thought we'd be here, in a lot of ways, this last year has been such a gift. I think we have had a shift of perspective. We've learned the importance of family. We have learned who the closest people are in our life. We have learned the importance of taking care of ourselves. All things we knew before, but this has really pushed us to take it to a level that we never expected. So as horrible as this has been, and thankfully for our situation, I do feel like we've weathered it quite well. And Rhett has really, he's not really missed a beat. There's been certain things that he will possibly remember. There'll be stuff that we remember that's not ideal about this year, but the perspective shift has been huge. So maybe that's what it would be, is don't wait till a crisis to shift your perspective on what's most important.
Wow.
I love that. I love that. I have something I want to ask. Just in watching your Instagram, you're pretty open about your faith, and I would love to ask you how that has served you in this process.
Good. I'm glad you asked that, because that's a part of it that I never know if I should bring in or not. But for me, it's been pinnacle. I think I've grown up going to church. My husband's a pastor. He was a youth pastor, and now he's a pastor. And so I've been a part of a church for 19 years now in a leading capacity, but my faith has always been incredibly important. But again, being shifted to have the perspective that I have now. I had really good perspective before. I knew what was important, but the shift in perspective has pushed me to make that a priority and not let anything kind of make me waver. And the same thing goes for my faith. I knew how important it was, but I will say, hands down, I do not know how anybody does this without it. From the beginning of this, I've said, God's got this. And that was like kind of something I said right from the beginning. And one of the craziest stories, and there's a lot of, I call them God stories, especially down in Florida. But this one to me is the craziest because of that. So I was coming home from Florida. It was just Rhett and I had like a ridiculous amount of stuff. And I was putting boxes out, and I had all our luggage, and I had Rhett, and I had a stroller, and nobody really paid any attention to us, except this beautiful blonde lady from Florida, like your typical Florida lady, who's like dressed in heels and a dress. And she was like, "Do you need help?" I was like, "No, it's fine. I'm good." And then she sees me. She's like, "You need help." So she grabbed the stroller or something, and then she whisks us in, and she's going to the same airlines. And she like comes in and she's like, "Hi guys, these are my friends." And she like, we blow past the lineup and we go to the front of the front table to give, or whatever it's called, to give them our luggage. And she's like, "These are my friends." And then we've got all this stuff. And she's like, "Why do you have so much stuff?" So I told her why we were there. And she looked at me and she's like, "It's okay. God's got you." And that was like right away. I was like, right, he does. And from the beginning, I've said that, like, God's got you. And then so we started talking, and then she kept helping me get through security. And on the way to security, she handed me this bracelet. And on this bracelet, it says, "God's got this." And like, I've just never taken it off. And then she handed me a devotional book that she wrote, and she's just the sweetest lady. She's kept in contact all the time. So it's moments like that where I am like, okay, God, you got this. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I know people sometimes in situations like this will say they're angry, but I'm like not even once have I gone to anger, because I know, for me, I know this isn't from God. And I've just stayed strong in that God's got this. And Rhett's going to be okay. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I know right now he's carried us through. Uh, so yeah, my faith was always important, but I have been pushed even more so to being like, I cannot do this without. So yeah, it's been huge.
Wow.
Okay, I need another God's got this story now. I need one more story.
Okay. Oh, this is a big one, and you may not want to hear this, but you can. It might be kind of weird for people, but maybe not. Who knows?
Okay, I'll give you, and if this helps, Kristin.
Yeah.
I'm not religious at all, so if you're worried about weirding people out, like if that's,
okay.
I'm not religious, Melissa is, I still love it. So
okay, perfect. Okay, Melissa, you'll appreciate this then. So there were a bunch of times where I'll tell you a short story and then I'll get to the super cool one. So Rhett, one of his chemos, it can affect your nerve endings. And they say like fine motor skills could be affected. But for him, it was almost, he would get like flat foot. So Drew, when they were down there, he'd be like, Rhett keeps falling. And it's just, it's almost like his Achilles, something with his Achilles. So he kept falling. So Drew was like, we need to get him a better pair of runners. So they went to a Nike store and they found this pair of runners. This remind me to talk about the financial side of it, because that's another thing. So we went and got this pair of runners, and they were, I mean, for a 4-year-old, we're not going to spend like $65 on a pair of runners. And the guy there saw Rhett, and by this, I mean, he doesn't look sick, but he has the NG and he has no hair. So it's quite obvious what's happening. And Drew's like, okay, these are super awesome shoes. We really like them, but I'm going to go check in other places. And the guy was like, you know what? They're on sale, but I'm going to give you additionally my employee sale. So it took these like super awesome shoes. I think they were like 75% off by the time. And again, it came up in the conversation that he was a believer, and they just were able to have a conversation. And there was multiple things like that where there was just, it always came up. Oh, I feel like I could tell you guys so many stories. Like there's just, I need to write a book on the God moments in Florida. But the last one, so it was Vicky who kind of did the whole God's got this before we get to the plane. And then we were actually flying to the same place, Atlanta, but she was on the earlier flight. So she went, and then we got on our plane, and I was so excited. Poor Rhett had 5 days of chemo leading up to us leaving. So I was anticipating him not feeling great, which meant for me, I could watch my show and finish it, because we don't get it in Canada. So like I downloaded all the shows, I could listen to them. So he's like laying down, and we managed to get like a full row. So it was great. He's laying down, not feeling great. I'm watching my show, but I could see this guy in front of me. There was a fellow beside me, and then directly I could see he wanted to talk to me. And he was like an older guy. And I was like, okay. So I take out my headphones, and I don't remember how he started the conversation, but he said, when I was younger, when I was 8, I had cancer. So I know what your son's feeling. And when you have chemo, it just feels like your entire body's on fire. And I was like, oh, thank you for sharing that, because I don't actually know what it feels like. He's like, oh, it feels horrible. And then he full on started preaching. And I wish I could have like pressed record on my phone to listen, because it was incredible. But I also noticed this guy a few rows up kind of looking, and I was like, I don't know. And because he's from Georgia and he's quite loud. And so I didn't know if that guy was offended or if he was like wanting to listen because it was super awesome. So I think that's why I was a bit uneasy. But I remember him talking about like having the faith of a mustard seed. That's all we need. The faith of a mustard seed. And then he's like, and God performs miracles. We need to finish it. We need to align ourselves with people shoulder to shoulder. We need to be shoulder to shoulder with people. We need to hug people to allow him to finish his miracles. And I was like, yeah, like I fully believe he does miracles. And he said, he's like, I just need you to know that your son has been completely healed. He's fine. And I was like, what? He's like, he's fine. I was like, okay. And then I was like, I need to text Drew. I need to like sign on to whatever texting thing I can on this airplane because I need to tell Drew on so-and-so date. I wrote in my phone. Richard told me Rhett's healed. So we kept talking. And he said, this has happened 3 times in my life where I know someone's going to be okay. So when he had cancer, he knew he was going to be okay. His sister had COVID and she was like super pregnant. She had COVID and her lungs were failing. And they got to the point where they did a test and they were at 15%. So she went into surgery to do, I don't remember what. Put a pacemaker in maybe. She went into surgery, 15%. When they opened her up, they needed multiple doctors. And he knew his sister was going to be okay. They needed multiple doctors to come in and look because her lungs were at 50%. And she was fine. She didn't need the pacemaker. And he said the 3rd time is with Rhett. Like, I know he's been healed and I know he's going to be okay. So whoa. I was like, okay, so I'm texting Drew. I'm like, this guy just told me that Rhett's going to be okay. So we get home and I kept saying, I think his name was Richard. And I said, I need you to meet my family. Like, I want you to meet them. I want to meet them to meet the man who like told me Rhett's going to be okay. So we get to Calgary and they're going hunting. So they're from Georgia and they're going to Saskatchewan and they're going hunting and they were very excited about it. And so we get home, we wait forever for my luggage and they lost our luggage. So we took forever to come out and our family's like waiting with signs and we're taking forever. I'm like, darn, we're for sure going to miss Richard. So we finally get out there and we're walking and all of a sudden I see Richard and he was like, I forgot to give you that hug that I talked about. So he gave me a hug and he's like, okay, I need to give you that hug. And I was like, but now you can meet my family. And so he met Drew and he went over and he talked to Drew and he said, I need you to, your son's going to be fine. And then he just prayed with Drew. So yeah, it's just moments like that where I'm like, some people would maybe hear that and think crazy things, but actually part of the story was he hasn't flown in ages. And he's like, this was planned. I was planned to fly today. I was planned to sit by you so I can share this story, to see Rhett. So yeah, there's been a lot of moments like that have helped give us the momentum to keep moving forward.
That's really cool, Kristin. I love that story. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I just need to. I know it is. It was totally one of those things where I'm like, yeah, thank you, God. But also, I mean, you are still cautiously optimistic.
Of course.
But I will hold on to that for sure.
Yeah. And I think probably, and I'm totally putting words in your mouth here. I think probably what is incredible to hear that, and I'm guessing here, is so many people would probably be afraid to say that to you. You know, and so I think just having someone say that to you so confidently, so lovingly, like so full of, like, obviously there's so much more conversation than what you shared with us that you had with him. And so that message was given with such love is what I'm hearing. And so like, I feel like hearing that from someone like that means so much additionally, because so many people would never say that.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Be brave enough to not only like share his story, but say your son's going to be okay. And you're right. Like he was confident in it. It wasn't like I feel like I was supposed to say this, but I'm not really sure. Like there was no waiver. He was confident.
Wow.
Yeah. That's really cool. I'm so glad that you've had moments like that though, Kristin. Like I feel like you said, that's what kind of a lot helps you keep going in a lot of ways. So in chatting about that, Kristin, you said that you wanted to bring awareness to the financial side of things. And so we want to ask you about that. What did you want to speak about in regards to the financial side of things?
Yes, totally. So I think when I had at the beginning mentioned, we all know about cancer, but we don't know like the really small aspects of it. Like I'll remember when they were doing the biopsy, not for a second did I worry or think about what type of cancer. It didn't even cross my mind because I just assumed cancer is cancer. Well, no, there's like, who knows how many types of cancer. So that was the first thing. Then chemo, right? We know they get chemo. I assumed chemo was chemo. Nope, there's like hundreds of different kinds of chemo, and each different person gets a different group. Like, it's wild to me that how down to a science it really is of what each person needs. So little that we know about cancer. But one of the most I think the one area of the family that's impacted that isn't talked about because it probably makes people uncomfortable is the financial side of it. The financial effect is huge, and probably more in the years to come than even at diagnosis, because at diagnosis, you often get a GoFundMe and all these things, which is incredible. But the financial impact, I think, will be lifelong for these families because there are so many things that add up. And I remember I had somebody say through somebody, so-and-so questioned why you need a GoFundMe. And at first I was like, well, I'll give all the money in that GoFundMe to switch spots with you. That was my first reaction. But then the next reaction is people are just so uneducated on what is needed and why a GoFundMe. So a GoFundMe helps with like medical costs that we don't know. Like one of Rhett's injections that he has to get every month if you don't have any sort of help, what is that called?
Benefits.
Thank you. If you don't have any benefits, the cost of one injection, and it's about like this much, is $1,500. And that's every month. So if you don't have benefits, every month you're paying for that. And so for us, we have benefits, but every month we're paying about $200 for that. And then there is, parking, and then you're there for a while. So there's food, and then you want to keep life normal for the other three or whoever. So there's still those costs. And I take generally one parent has to stop working, because if anybody does this while working, I'd love to talk to them, because I don't actually know. I don't think you'd be able to do it very well, because it's all consuming. So loss of income, unexpected things. And now with the way Alberta's working, we have to go down to Jacksonville, and that's a huge cost. There's a lot, staying at the Ronald McDonald House is amazing, but that's a huge cost. And then there's food. And so there's so many unknown costs as well as loss of income. But yeah, I just think it pushes families back way more than anybody would like to admit. And probably way more than anybody who's not in the position would like to realize.
I would have no idea. Well, I just jumped when you said staying at the Ronald McDonald House is a big cost. Full naivety, thought that they made the Ronald McDonald House so you didn't have to have that cost. You just blew my mind. Do you mind me asking the cost of staying at the Ronald McDonald House?
So they suggest, it is small. I'm trying to think. They suggest between $20 and $30 a night. But when you're in Jacksonville, that's $20 to $30 US, and you're there for 9 weeks.
Oh,
so it adds up substantially. There's other families in Calgary who, like, there's a family who's going down soon, and this story is so sad. She's pregnant, like almost 9 months pregnant, and he's supposed to go down when she's due, and they can't stay at the Ronald McDonald House because there's going to be a baby and they can't all be together. So they have to do VRBO. And those are not cheap. But we don't get help with that. We get help with the medical side. We get help with flights, but that's where it stops.
Oh my gosh.
We'll get you down there, but where you stay is up to you. And even that, like you're saying, Ronald McDonald House, $20-$30 a night doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot when it's 9 weeks, like you said.
American.
Yeah. And you're still paying your mortgage or your rent, and you're still paying for all of those things that are going on back at home. It's not like you're moved out and someone else is filling your spot, paying for those bills while you're gone too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because it's such a it's such a big piece of this. And you're right, like not talked about, there's not really a light on that. That's the first time I've heard that. And like, I'm really grateful that you brought that up. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, same. I knew there was extra costs, but I didn't know there was costs to the Ronald McDonald House. I had no idea.
Mm-mm.
And that's a simple one. That's a really simple one that is an automatic cost that if you have to travel for treatment, which most people do, that you don't know about. You just assume like, oh, like, yeah, you're going to stay in. I mean, it's free accommodations, but it's not free accommodations.
And it is wonderful. Like what the Ronald McDonald House does is incredible. And it is significantly lower than doing a VRBO. And I mean, the Ronald McDonald House in Jacksonville was the most amazing place. But it is those additional costs that just make this, it's just, I mean, life still carries on. We still, like you said, we have mortgage, we have utilities, all those things carry on, but people just don't realize of the setback. And I feel now there are some incredible organizations that really do help with families. But there is only so many things they can help with. And unfortunately, there's so many families. They need to make sure they touch all the families because it can't just be one family. So it's a part that I think people need to recognize more.
Yeah.
Is there anything on your heart, Kristin, that you haven't shared yet that you really wanted to share when we chatted today?
I think, no. Maybe the only thing is speaking, if there's anybody who listens who is new to the diagnosis, from mom to mom, what I would say is find somebody who's in it as well. Find people who have been in it to help you or to communicate with, because that has been such a source of strength for me, to walk with people who fully understand it. Because while my family is very sympathetic and this is their grandson, this is their nephew, they can't fully understand what it is to have a child go through that. And they do a really good job, but they don't get it fully. So to find people who really understand. So for me, that's been Claire. Claire and I have connected huge. I'll never forget seeing Sloan on, it pops up on your Instagram somehow, seeing Sloan and being devastated, having no idea that 2 weeks from that date, we would receive the same diagnosis. I had no idea. I didn't know Claire. And somehow this came up. And then I reached out to Claire and we connected. And in both of our state of shocks, she was going to the pharmacist. I was trying to deal with something with Rhett leaving. We hugged in the middle of Alberta Children's Hospital. And we become great friends, with the sole foundation of our friendship being that both our kids are battling cancer. There is a flip side to it where it can be a blessing and a curse. To align yourself with somebody who has the same diagnosis can be very hard, because you start to compare. You start to see if one child has a bad response, oh my goodness, is my child going to have a bad response? But for Claire and I, our kids have completely different cancers. So there's no comparing, which has been such a gift, because Claire fully understands every aspect of it. When Sloan's having a bad day, I can fully understand how Claire's feeling. And so I think that I would just encourage moms to try. I recently somehow connected, again, I think it popped up on Instagram, and I got in touch with this mom. And while you have to be patient for when they're ready, I made sure she knew that when she was ready, that I would be fully available to help her process this, and even be able to send little notes of, I promise it does, like the pain lessens. The shock will never go away, but the pain lessens, and you can start to put one foot in front of the other. And now she's at a place where we communicate quite regularly. And when Rhett was at the hospital last week, we were able to meet. And I said, we don't need to have a conversation, because I know it's still a lot. Her poor little guy is still in there and it's been so tough. But I said, I just want to give you a hug, and I just want you to know I'm here. So it's stuff like that where I almost feel like if that's my position, if that's what I can do out of this, is help families know that, well, I can't say it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And I can't say it's going to be easy, and there will be good days, bad days, but being able to kind of gently nudge them to say, like, I'm here, I understand, and wholeheartedly I understand. Um, I think, yeah, like that's just been a blessing for me, and I hope I can do that for more families.
Amazing.
That's an incredible heart you have, Kristin. Really incredible that's where you go.
I think 2 weeks into the diagnosis, we created the rally for Rhett, and with the goal to raise money. And I remember, funny enough, the same person that questioned the GoFundMe put a post of, your heart is just so big. Like, how are you doing this when your son has cancer? And I'm like, yes, this is exactly why you had the comments you had, because this is my heart. This is my character. I would far rather help bring awareness to others. I would far rather raise money for others than raise it for myself, which I certainly haven't done. So at 2 weeks in, we kind of made the Rally for Rhett shirts and put it out there for all our people. On the back it says support squad, and raise money to actually go towards the Alberta Children's Hospital. So it's stuff like that too, that when you can find the ability to focus on something else and kind of pour yourself into something else, that really also does give you the momentum to keep pushing.
Yeah.
That's
I guess
so
I
great.
would say the one big question that's sitting here for me is, this is a loaded question. This is a loaded question. But how has all of this been for you mentally, processing and taking care of you at the same time of taking care of Rhett and your other 3 children? And obviously you have a husband.
I was going to say marriage.
Marriage. Yeah.
Yes, loaded question that I feel like I can answer. How have I been? I think I've done really good at being numb, and I do a really good job at protecting others, for fear of them not doing well. So I just go through the motions. And I have learned recently that I don't naturally love conflict, which means I protect situations from allowing them to turn to conflict. Um, which can be really good and really bad, because oftentimes when you do that, you're actually, while I'm protecting them, I'm harming myself. And I'm not allowing myself to feel. And so just actually last week, my husband and I went to a marriage intensive. And while I was thinking, like, okay, thank goodness we came into this diagnosis with a fairly strong foundation. It takes it takes a toll on the marriage, because I am full cancer world, he is full work world, and the two don't really collide. And then you add the other 3 kiddos where we're trying to do their stuff, and the last point of connecting is your husband and you. So we and husband and wives process very differently. And so I think you just kind of go into your way of doing things, and I am like full, how do I get Rhett healthy? How do I keep Rhett healthy? So we drifted, and not to a place where we were in like trouble, but we were given the opportunity to go on this intensive. And it was a 3-day, it was like 21 hours of what I thought was counseling, and just us and 2 others. But it was actually more about self-discovery. And it really was more about kind of pulling the pieces of the onion back and finding, why do you react the way you react? Why do you, like identifying our needs and identifying what our buttons are, and why, when that button's pushed, do you react this way? So it was a really interesting opportunity to really look internally and kind of look at past things and how I got to who I am today. So I think in that moment, I realized I'm maybe not doing as well as I thought I was, but it also gave me the tools of what is necessary to become the best version of myself, and really to live out of a place of integrity. And they would say, if you live out of a place of integrity, you're functioning as who you were created to be. So I think I've done quite well. And I think as moms, we're doers, but I definitely have some work ahead of me. But my motivation is my kids, and my motivation is my husband, and being able to take those steps to make sure that I am working out of a place of integrity and who I'm fully created to be.
That's really beautiful. I'm really
Also
glad. Pardon me?
That was also a loaded answer, I feel.
No, it was fantastic, because I think you could have just left it as like, I think I'm doing pretty good, like, and it's so everything you went into is beautiful. I'm really glad that you and your husband were able to take that time and go and do that together. And I think what you were saying when you said, I've done a really good job at numbing out. I think that's really natural when you're going through crisis. And not that this is the same, but I've been, with all of our Mother's Day conversations and all of our childhood cancer story conversations and all these things are running through my brain. I think that if you think back to like families who went through like the Great Depression and every generation prior to that, everybody lived in survival mode. Like, it was like literally you needed to work to put food on the table, whether that was physically or going to find it or whatever. And so it's not that mental health didn't exist, but there was no ability to have mental health crises, because if you did, you could not put food on the table. Your family was starving. And I think that you take that same mentality and you put it into some sort of diagnosis like this or a traumatic event. And that's exactly what your body goes through, is your mental state does not matter. Survival matters. And then when you will come out to a point where you can live and breathe again, that mental stuff comes out, because now you're not in survival mode. And so the fact that you're able to look at that now before it just plummets on you is really awesome. Really awesome that you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, people are always like, you've been so strong and you guys have done this so well and you've just done it way better than we could have. And on one hand, I will be like, yeah, thank you. We've done, like, I really do feel like we've done a great job, but I do give that all to my faith, that's given me the strength to do this, as well as the perspective and a focus far bigger than myself. But I think everybody would do the same thing, right? As moms, we will do anything for our kids. And when you potentially have where the life of your child is put in front of you, it doesn't matter what is standing in your way. You're going to fight for everything. Now, keeping the momentum to keep that fight strong, I don't know if every mom could do that, because it is tiring. And if you don't have support, and if you don't have a foundation of kind of a healthy internal self, you're not going to be able to have the stamina to do that well. So that's one thing I'm super thankful, is that I did have the stamina to push through, because there were days where, I mean, never did I want to give up, but there were days where I just felt like I'd been hit by a train. But I definitely have had the stamina to push, and I'm super grateful for that.
Wow. How do you receive it when people say you're so strong?
I think now, you know what, I try not to, like, there's very little about this year that I will become cynical about, or angry about, but there is like some things. But I think, I do question people's motives often, probably more than I did before. If you tell me I'm really strong, is that because you actually believe I'm really strong, or is that because you just wouldn't be able to do what I've done? So it's more of like the heart behind what they say, what can I do to help? Do you actually want it? So I feel like I'm a bit more questioning the heart of it. Where if there was another thing I was thinking, I don't remember what it was. But I think it's kind of more the heart behind it. I want to know it's sincere. I don't want you just to say it or do it because you feel like you have to.
Yeah.
Don't tell me I'm strong because you have a certain perspective of what things should be like. Tell me I'm strong because you actually wholeheartedly believe I'm strong. Yeah. So, but if somebody says it to me, I don't give them that ramble. If somebody says it to me, I often will say thank you. And depending on who it is, I will say, every mom would do the same thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just think that this is my own personal opinion, that you're so strong. It is a compliment, but it's also it's a necessity. The right. Strength is a necessity. I didn't go to the gym and just work out and decide to get strong. I had to. And just like you said, you would do the exact same thing because you have to. You don't have a choice.
And that's exactly it. I have no other choice. I'm not going to be like, okay, give me the diagnosis and I'm going to sit here and let modern medicine do its thing. I'm going to let modern medicine do its thing, and I'm going to fight like hell to keep my kid healthy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably what I do say is I have no choice.
Mm.
Yeah.
Which I don't mean that to undermine the compliment. You
No.
are strong. It is okay to say. I just like,
No.
yeah, I feel like it can be a harder one to receive because it's not like a choice. It's not like you decided to run a marathon and they're like, yeah, good job. You know, you had to do that.
No, I actually really don't. Like, for what Claire is doing, I'm like, good on you. I'm going to be there cheering for you all because I'm not running. I hate running. But I think one of the things, and it's actually on this hoodie, one of the things, if you saw Rhett and you were like, okay, Rhett, what are you going to tell the people who are going to run this marathon? He'll say, I'll tell them, you are brave, you are strong, you've got this.
Oh.
And that's what we put it on here. And even my husband were like, we have to figure out how to tattoo that because that's what he tells everybody. And so I think as much as he's gone through, and he was like the sweetest little being before, but he is the most thoughtful, compassionate kiddo who I'm like, you're the one we should be saying that to. And well, we do, but he will often be like, I actually spoke on Mother's Day at church. And I remember saying to my kids, like, Kate, I'm super nervous. What, like, any tips? And he was like, Mom, remember, you are strong. You are brave. You got this. I'm like, right. Thank you, 5-year-old Rhett, for reminding me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Aww. But I mean, okay, that just speaks to the kind of parents you are for him. And so that's really beautiful, Kristin. It's really beautiful. Honestly, I could keep going for hours. I
know.
I just wrote that down. Oh, Kristin, we're so grateful for you to spend this time with us and
Thank you.
Be so open and share everything. I mean, I learned so much from this conversation. I have so many notes, like so many things that I want to keep from this. It's so great. Thank you so much.
It's given me so much. Well, when I spoke last week at church, it was all about being brave. And it was so much of what I spoke on was what I've learned. And so, like, I think I said before, like, I wouldn't wish it. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I will be forever grateful for what I've learned.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, Kristin.
You are welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. To help support the growth of this podcast, please feel free to leave us a review, follow us on socials, or recommend us to your friends. Your support honestly means the world to us. With love, Sammy and Melissa.